On July 3, 1971, Jim Morrison was found dead in a bathtub in Paris. No autopsy, no photos, no answers. Just a 27-year-old icon, gone. The official story? Heart failure. But for decades, the whispers have only grown louder. Did he really die in that tub? Or somewhere else? Did the man who sang about breaking through vanish under a lie? This isn't just a rock star's death, it's one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in music history. And what if we told you the truth was never buried with him? Because Jim Morrison's death doesn't end a story. It opens one. Paris, 1971. On the morning of July 3, 1971, the world lost a voice, a poet, a rebel. Jim Morrison, frontman of The Doors, was found dead in the bathtub of his Paris apartment. His girlfriend, Pamela Corson, claimed he hadn't been feeling well, that he'd taken a bath, that she walked in and found him cold, lifeless. No cries for help, just silence, and the end of an era. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure. No autopsy was performed. French law didn't require one unless foul play was suspected, and Pamela told the authorities there was none. But that alone raised red flags. Morrison was 27, not 77. A hard drinker, yes. A tortured artist, absolutely. But heart failure, without a single examination? The burial happened quickly, too quickly. Within days, Morrison was laid to rest in Père Lachaise Cemetery, among poets, legends, and ghosts. The Doors released a brief statement. The media fumbled the story. No press conference, no open investigation, no goodbye, just a whisper. He's gone. And with that whisper, the myth began. He joined the infamous 27 Club, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and now Morrison, all dead within 2 years. But unlike Hendrix and Joplin, Jim left behind something stranger. Not just grief, but a hole in the story. A death wrapped in poetry, confusion, and suspicion. The day Jim died, something went quiet in rock music, and it never fully came back. Ray Manzarek. But before Jim Morrison became a mystery, he was a phenomenon. A mind too bright to stay inside the lines. From military brat to mystic, his path was never normal. And the man who'd become the Lizard King didn't just want to sing, he wanted to transform. The next chapter takes us to where it all began, inside the mind of a boy genius turned rock god. From boy genius to rock god, Jim Morrison wasn't born a star. He was born a storm. Born in 1943, in Melbourne, Florida, he had an IQ in the top 0.1%. A restless, electric mind that inhaled books and philosophy with the same intensity he'd later give to sex and sound. From a young age, he was obsessed with poets like Rimbaud and philosophers like Nietzsche. And what haunted most kids? Jim studied. One of the earliest turning points came on a family road trip. He saw a car crash on a Native American reservation, bodies in the road, blood on the asphalt. For years, he claimed the spirits of the dead entered him that day. Whether metaphor or memory, it marked him. It was the first time I tasted fear, he once said, and I liked it. His relationship with authority was always explosive. His father, a U.S. Navy admiral, tried to discipline him, but Morrison pushed back, hard. Teachers called him unruly, difficult. He wasn't rebellious for attention. He simply couldn't stand rules. Instead, he found a dark fascination with demonology, theater, surrealism, things that made other students nervous. To Jim, they were freedom. By the time he landed at UCLA's film school, he wasn't just another student. He was becoming the Lizard King, a persona built on shadows and seduction. He wrote lyrics before there was a band. He read philosophy like scripture. And with every passing day, the line between Jim Morrison and the myth he was creating started to blur. I am the Lizard King. I can do anything. Jim Morrison. But even a poet needs a stage, and Jim Morrison found his on the sunburned streets of Venice Beach. It was here, barefoot and half-starved, that the boy with the words met the man with sound. What followed would change rock history forever. Because when Jim met Ray Manzarek, the doors opened, and music would never sound the same again. Venice Beach. By the summer of 1965, Jim Morrison was living like a ghost. No steady job, no band, just rooftops, notebooks, and LSD. Venice Beach was his temple, poetry his prayer. He wandered the coastline scribbling verses, sleeping under stars, and swallowing tabs like they were communion wafers. It was part madness, part mission. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing truth. That all changed when he ran into Ray Manzarek, a fellow UCLA film student and keyboardist. Ray had the sound, Jim had the words. One afternoon, Morrison recited lyrics he'd written, lines that would become Moonlight Drive. "I couldn't believe what I was hearing," Manzarek later said. "It was like hearing rock and roll poetry for the first time." The Doors were born that day. Their name was inspired by Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, a reference to William Blake's line, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite." The idea wasn't just psychedelic, it was spiritual. Morrison didn't just want to entertain, he wanted to awaken, to burn illusions, to crack open the sky. Morrison's image, leather pants, unbuttoned shirts, snake-like stage movements, was no accident. He was channeling Marlon Brando, channeling Andy Warhol, channeling Dionysus. He was sex and danger and theater all in one. But the poetry came first. Every hit, the end, break on through, when the music's over, began on paper, not in a jam session. That's what made him different and dangerous. He wasn't just fronting a band, he was leading a movement. Ray Manzarek. The band was born, and so was the myth. But Morrison didn't just perform, he possessed the stage. And the crowd? They never knew if they were witnessing genius or a breakdown. Up next, the wild shows, the arrests, and the moments that turned Jim from rock star into outlaw. Because Jim didn't want to be loved, he wanted to set fire to the stage. Stagecraft and controversy. Jim Morrison didn't just perform, he invaded the stage. Every concert was war, theater, and seance. At the Whiskey A Go-Go, the Doors' early residency turned heads fast. But it wasn't just the music, it was him. One night, mid-song, he screamed an Oedipal rant so dark it got them fired. That song became the end. The legend began. His refusal to be censored was nearly religious. In 1967, the Doors were booked on The Ed Sullivan Show, a major break. CBS asked Morrison to change one line from "Light My Fire," "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," was too suggestive. Morrison agreed, then sang it anyway, loudly, clearly. The Doors were banned for life. Morrison just shrugged. Things turned violent in New Haven, Connecticut. Jim was caught making out backstage and sprayed in the face with mace by a police officer. Minutes later, he walked on stage and told the crowd what had happened, mocking the police live on mic. Officers swarmed the stage and arrested him mid-performance. It was the first time in U.S. history that a rock star was arrested during a show. But the madness only fueled his image. Morrison became the first true outlaw of rock. His shows weren't just concerts. They were unpredictable rituals. One night he'd be poetic and hypnotic. The next, drunk, hostile, collapsing into the drums. Fans couldn't look away, critics couldn't figure him out, and promoters couldn't control him. But no one could forget him. On stage, Jim wasn't a man, he was a storm. Robbie Krieger. But storms burn out, And as the lights dimmed and the crowds grew restless, Jim's demons got louder. He stopped being the Lizard King and started becoming a ghost in his own body. In the next chapter, we watch the slow unraveling, the absinthe, the exile, the fading flame, and the final move to Paris, where he hoped to escape everything. But everything followed him. Descent into darkness. By 1970, the Jim Morrison who once hypnotized arenas was fading fast. His drinking wasn't reckless anymore. It was constant. Absinthe, bourbon, and wine became his morning, noon, and night. His voice cracked, his timing slipped, and his iconic looks began to dissolve. The leather-clad sex symbol became bloated, bearded, and disheveled. Fans started calling him the bearded poet, but not always kindly. Inside the doors, tension simmered. Morrison clashed with bandmates, missed rehearsals, and tanked live performances. During their infamous Miami show, he allegedly exposed himself on stage, though no photos proved it. Still, the moment triggered indecency charges, national outrage, and canceled concerts. The wild mystique was becoming a liability. Jim Morrison was becoming more trouble than legend. He needed a break. In March 1971, he moved to Paris with Pamela Courson. The idea was peace, to escape fame, recharge, and return to poetry. He rented a modest apartment in the right bank. No press, no stage, just Jim, a notebook, and the city that once cradled Rimbaud. But the peace didn't last. Old habits crossed the ocean, and so did the pain. Witnesses say he still drank daily, often heavily. Some say he was using heroin. Others say he was just lost. He looked like a man trying to disappear, one friend recalled. But Morrison didn't want to die. He wanted to breathe. Paris was his final escape attempt. The problem? His demons had a passport too. He looked like a man trying to disappear. Paris friend. And then, just like that, he was gone. The announcement came quietly. Heart failure, no foul play, no autopsy, no press frenzy. Just a body in a bathtub, a grieving girlfriend, and more questions than answers. Coming up, the moment the real mystery began, not with a scream, but with silence. The missing autopsy that opened the door to decades of doubt. The missing autopsy. When news broke of Jim Morrison's death on July 3, 1971, it didn't make front-page headlines. In France, death without signs of foul play didn't require an autopsy. Pamela Courson told police he died of natural causes. They believed her. A doctor signed the certificate. And that was that. The official cause, heart failure. But no medical records were released. No toxicology report, no official timeline, just Pamela's word and Morrison's body buried days later at Père Lachaise Cemetery. It all happened so fast, many fans didn't even know he had died until after the funeral. Some of his bandmates didn't get the call until it was already over. The media tried to make sense of it, but details were vague. French papers were cautious, American outlets scrambled, and the Doors' remaining members kept mostly quiet. Without a public investigation, a press conference, or even a viewing, the vacuum filled with whispers. Did he overdose? Was it suicide? Was he even really dead? It was the perfect storm for conspiracy. A rock star with a mythic persona dies mysteriously in a foreign country. No witnesses, no autopsy, no closure. The facts were thin, the story was foggy, and the legend? It was just getting started. You don't bury a legend without questions, and Morrison left nothing but questions. Music journalist. But then, decades later, a bombshell dropped. A Paris nightclub owner stepped forward with a new story, one that rewrote everything. According to him, Jim didn't die in a bathtub. He died on a club floor, surrounded by silence and secrets. Up next, the witness who may have seen it all, and the cover-up that could have rewritten rock history. Sam Burnett's bombshell. It took 36 years for someone to finally say it out loud. Jim Morrison didn't die in his bathtub. In 2007, Sam Burnett, a former French journalist and manager of the Paris nightclub Rock and Roll Circus, stepped forward with a claim that sent shockwaves through rock history. His story wasn't speculation, it was an eyewitness account. According to Burnett, Jim died in the club's bathroom on the night of July 2nd, not the morning of July the 3rd. He says Morrison came in late, looking pale and high, and went to the restroom, where he collapsed after allegedly snorting heroin. Burnett insists staff found his lifeless body slumped in a stall. Panic set in. There was no ambulance, no police, just whispers and decisions. He claims that two men, friends of Pamela Courson, quietly carried Morrison out of the club, loaded him into a car, and took him back to his apartment. The bathtub story? Burnett calls it fiction. He says Pamela invented it to hide the scandal of a heroin death in a public place. She needed a clean version, Burnett wrote, and she found it. There was no investigation, no interviews with club staff, just silence. Burnett said he stayed quiet out of fear and because the owners didn't want trouble. His account raised more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. If true, it wasn't just a death, it was a cover-up. She needed a clean version, and she found it. Sam Burnett. But Burnett wasn't alone. As years passed, others started to talk. Musicians, photographers, friends. Some claimed they were there. Some said they helped move the body. Others just hinted. Whispers in the night that something was wrong. Coming up, the witnesses who stepped out of the shadows and the tangle of truth and memory that followed. Voices from the night after Burnett came forward. More voices joined the storm. People who'd stayed silent for decades started sharing stories, fragments of the night Jim Morrison died. Among them was Marianne Faithfull, the iconic singer and Rolling Stones muse. Her claim? Her boyfriend at the time, drug dealer Jean de Breteuil, gave Morrison the heroin that killed him. She said it without hesitation. He went to see Jim, and he killed him. De Breteuil, who was known to mix dangerously potent batches, allegedly delivered a dose too strong for Morrison. But when de Breteuil died of an overdose just days later in Morocco, he took any truth with him. Then there was Patrick Chauvel, a Paris-based photojournalist. In 2020, he claimed he was asked to help move Morrison's body from the club to his apartment. He didn't know the full situation, just that someone needed help. We were told not to ask questions, he said. Another link in a chain of secrecy. But memory is fragile. Decades passed before these accounts surfaced. No hard evidence was ever recovered. No tapes, no signed statements, no physical proof. Critics argue these recollections may be confused, exaggerated, or flat out wrong. But even so, the pattern was haunting. People were starting to talk, and they were all saying the same thing. Jim didn't die where they said he did. He went to see Jim, and he killed him. Marianne Faithfull. But if Jim really died of a heroin overdose, one question lingered. Would he even use heroin? Those who knew him said no. He hated needles. He feared hard drugs. And yet, the stories kept pointing to heroin. In the next chapter, we explore that contradiction. Could Jim Morrison have used it after all? Or was someone else's addiction about to take them both down? Could Morrison have used heroin? Jim Morrison had many vices: alcohol, psychedelics, reckless abandon. But heroin? That was supposed to be off limits. Friends said he hated needles. He thought it was a junkie's drug. Jim wouldn't touch that stuff, one roadie said. He liked to drink and trip, not fade away. But the rumors didn't stop. Sam Burnett's story hinges on one key detail, that Jim snorted heroin, not injected it. If true, that would sidestep the needle phobia and explain the overdose. In 1970s, Paris, snorting heroin was becoming more common, especially among artists who thought it was safer. But it wasn't. It was just as deadly and even harder to detect. The connection may have come through Pamela Courson. She had a known heroin habit. In some circles, she was seen as the one who may have introduced it to Jim. If she had heroin in their apartment or on her that night, it's possible Jim tried it. Maybe once. Maybe too much. Maybe it was just curiosity. But maybe that's all it took. Still, no heroin paraphernalia was ever found in their flat. No syringes, no baggies, no residue, nothing in writing, no toxicology. It's the absence of evidence that keeps the door open. Maybe he did it. Maybe he didn't. But without proof, the question hangs. Did Jim Morrison die by his own hand or someone else's? Jim wouldn't touch that stuff. He liked to drink and trip, not fade away. Former roadie. But if heroin killed him, how did his body disappear from a club without anyone noticing? How did the authorities sign off so fast? The next chapter isn't about drugs, it's about logistics. The unanswered question at the heart of the mystery: if Morrison died in public, how did they make it look so private? The logistics of a cover-up. If Jim Morrison really died in the bathroom of a Paris nightclub, one question refuses to go away. How did his body vanish without the world noticing? It wasn't just about hiding the truth, it was about orchestrating it, and doing so quietly in a city that barely knew who he was. In Paris, Morrison wasn't a superstar. The French press barely covered him. He had no security, no entourage. He wandered freely, even anonymously. This low profile might have made a cover-up shockingly plausible. If you were going to hide a public death, this was the place. And if anyone could keep a secret, it was the bohemian underbelly of 1970s Paris. According to Sam Burnett, 2 men carried Jim's body out of the rock and roll circus, bypassing staff and customers. Some say they slipped out a back entrance. Others say the club was near empty. Either way, no ambulance was called, no police alerted, just a quiet disappearance, a final ride, and a body placed in a tub hours later. If true, Pamela Courson's story wasn't just misleading, it was manufactured. What's chilling is how quickly authorities accepted her account. They filed no further questions. They didn't investigate the timeline. No one questioned the lack of medical history, the sudden death of a 27-year-old, or the speed of the burial. The case was closed before it was ever open, and with that, the truth may have been sealed, not with evidence, but with absence. The greatest lie is the one told without being questioned. French Reporter, 1971. But Morrison's story didn't end in that apartment, or even in the silence that followed. Because even if his death is still debated, his legacy isn't. What he left behind, music, poetry, rebellion, never faded. It only grew louder. In the next chapter, we explore how Morrison went from fallen star to immortal icon, not despite the mystery, but because of it. The legacy left behind. Whatever the truth about his death, Jim Morrison's influence never died. In 1993, the Doors were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Even decades later, he stood tall alongside Hendrix, Dylan, and Joplin. But Morrison wasn't just a rock star. He was a symbol, a man who blended poetry, darkness, and sound like no one before him. Musicians from Bono to Iggy Pop to Eddie Vedder cite him as a major influence. His stage presence, raw, dangerous, sensual, became the blueprint for punk, goth, grunge, and alt-rock. His lyrics weren't just sung, they were experienced. Lines like, "This is the end, beautiful friend," didn't fade. They echoed in headphones and haunted generations. When Oliver Stone released The Doors in 1991, with Val Kilmer giving a chillingly accurate performance, the Morrison myth reignited. Suddenly, a new wave of fans was drawn to the mystery. His words hit home for a generation raised on Nirvana and 9 Inch Nails. And with it came new questions, new books, and even more theories. But unlike other members of the 27 Club, Morrison's death remains the most mysterious. Jimmy and Janis had coroners. Jim had whispers. And that silence? It became part of the allure. A death without clarity became a life without end. Morrison didn't die, he transformed. That's what myths do. Music historian. And where do myths go when they die? To sacred ground. Jim Morrison's final resting place didn't just become a grave, it became a pilgrimage, a shrine, a place where fans gather not to mourn, but to wonder. In the next chapter, we walk through the gates of Père Lachaise. Père Lachaise. Tucked among the poets and prophets of Père Lachaise. So cemetery, Jim Morrison lies buried beneath a simple headstone. No gold, no marble, just a name. But that grave draws over 100,000 visitors a year, more than Edith Piaf or Oscar Wilde. It's not just a tomb, it's a ritual site. For decades, the grave was covered in graffiti, candles, whiskey bottles, and poems. Fans etched lyrics into nearby stones. Some lit joints in silence. Others wept. For years, Morrison's resting place was unmarked. Only those who knew could find it. The city debated removing the site, but the fans kept coming. Eventually, a bust was installed, then stolen, then replaced. Today, the grave is guarded, but not by force, by reverence. It's one of the most visited graves in the world, and those who make the journey often say the same thing. You can feel him there, not as a ghost, but as an echo. Some believe Morrison foresaw his death. In his final notebooks, he wrote of departure, stillness, and slipping beneath the waves. Whether those poems were premonitions or coincidences, one thing is certain. He found in Paris what he never found in life: peace. He didn't belong to Los Angeles, he belonged to eternity. Paris understood that. Fin at Père Lachaise. And so we're left with a question. Did Jim Morrison really die in that tub? Or did he disappear, leaving behind a puzzle only time could solve? In our final chapter, we ask what truly matters, the facts or the myth. Because when the legend is larger than life, maybe the mystery is the answer. The legend endures. 50 years later, the details still blur. No autopsy, no photos, conflicting stories. Maybe we'll never know what really happened on that July night in Paris. But maybe we don't need to. Because Jim Morrison's greatest trick wasn't vanishing. It was becoming something more, not just a man, but a mirror. He became the archetype, the eternal rebel, the doomed poet, the flame that burned too bright. His death became a question. His life became an invitation to challenge authority, to question reality, to break on through. And every time someone plays Riders on the Storm or reads An American Prayer, he breathes again. New theories still emerge. New witnesses still come forward. The club death, the government cover-up, even those who claim he faked his death entirely. But truth is slippery, and legends don't need proof. They just need passion. Jim once wrote, "Myths and legends die hard in America. We love them for the extra dimension they provide." And that's what Jim Morrison became, an extra dimension. A voice that echoes in alleyways, headphones, and graveyards. A death that refuses to close the door, and a soul that keeps singing long after the music's over. Myths and legends die hard in America. Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison didn't just write poetry. He became it. He didn't just front a band. He fronted a revolution of thought, sound, rebellion, and darkness. And maybe that's why his death still haunts us. Because it wasn't just sudden. It was incomplete. There were no final words, no confirmed cause, just a closed casket and 100 unanswered questions. In a city that barely knew his name, he was buried like a stranger, but mourned like a god. And over 50 years later, we're still searching for truth, for closure, for meaning. But maybe that's the point. Maybe Morrison was never meant to leave neatly. Maybe his death was his final work of art, unfinished, untamed, unforgettable. From club bathroom whispers to heroin rumors, from silent graves to sacred shrines. The facts are blurry, but the legacy is clear. He broke every rule. He defied every mold. And when the world tried to contain him, he vanished. Because legends don't die in bathtubs. They live in the stories we can't stop telling. This isn't the end of Jim Morrison. This is the echo that keeps coming back. And the door is still open.